Chapter 6, Part 2, On the Way. Where? Verse 26. Jameson awoke from his nap just as Sunshaft approached the edge of the immense butte of rock, the great rock Galoth. As large as a country all on its own, it stood alone in the vastness of the territory of Galgariah, as tall as the highest mountains. But just one unique and monstrous mesa jutting straight up from out of the earth. Behind them, the rugged, lavender-lit Sebring Mountains raced toward the curved horizon. Before them yawned the new cobalt blue skies. To the south and east, large black thunderclouds rolled menacingly toward them, as if trying to cut them off before they reached the edge of the great cliffs. The storm rumbled and growled and sent bolts of jagged lightning down into the cowering jungles far below. Gabriel was now at the helm, speaking with Percy, aloof as ever. Ott the Thordian had gone below to rest as well. Jameson sat alone, spinning in his chair, round and round, watching the colorful heavens along the horizon. Once again he thought he was heading out into the great unknown. Until recently, he had spent his waking days pampered and spoiled by chambermaids, nurses, and hand servants of the Palace of Mead. He was schooled by the greatest teachers every afternoon, and at night he cavorted with multitudes of friends and around his palace and out in the rolling fields beneath the cold summer stars. But not anymore. That life was gone forever. Even the memories of it all seemed as distant and faded as a waking dream. A crooked bolt of lightning tore the southern sky in half. The air shook and vibrated with thunder that followed. Jameson knew in his heart that Gabriel and Tytel Bantu were right. With or without Dedlin Dane, they had to go on. There just had to be some other alternative. Some other viable source of information, some other way to locate this elusive cave. And yet, the Kingdom continent was a massive barbaric land, and Jameson had no clue of where to even begin looking. North? South? East or west? All? Still, there was a certain sense of relief now, too, escaping the tumultuous uprising in Tungulin unscathed. The ride he was now on with his fine new crew was somewhat refreshing to him under the circumstances. Despite their lack of direction, it was good to be off again, with such a valiant cast of characters this time. He smiled when he thought of Dedlin Dane whispering in his ear just before he had left. How had he known Jameson's secret? Jasmine's secret. He had thought that his secret was safe and secure, but apparently not. Had the other wizards known too? Maybe that's why they hesitated so when debating and revealing his identity to King Bantu and the council. He could only wonder. As far as he knew, with no wizard on board, his secret remained that now. His personal secret for as long as it could keep. As his feelings for Gabriel had grown, Jameson wondered if he should share this secret with him too, or if he should still wait and keep it covered. Not yet, he whispered to himself, smiling. Sunshaft Aurealis shot out over the last mountain cliff precipice of Galoth, leaving the Sebrings, the forests, and the steaming jungles and the land of Tungulin and Tytel Bantu far behind. The sheer mountain wall dropped straight down for nearly 5,000 feet to the strange lands over which they now flew, the wildlands of Galgariah. As Sunshaft began her long descent back to Earth, Jameson watched the monstrous plateau fall farther and farther behind, the details becoming less and less clear as the distance between them increased. Such a massive rock jutted from the earth, the size of a small country. He remembered seeing the great rock Galoth for the first time while fleeing there in Habad's nasty ship stolen from the assassins. He had come out of the sky like a great wall before him, stretching from the earth to the heavens above the sky. From a distance, it had looked like a dark cloud approaching. How glad he had been to have found it, and yet how terrified he had been that he was not going to be able to reach the top before the skycraft ran out of fuel. He had been so sick, from the knife wound too, delirious and hallucinating. Now, behind him, the racing storm reached the edge of the rock. Turbulent storm clouds fell over the side in an incredible display of whirlwinds and frantic netted lightning, an extremely awesome display of nature's strength and beauty. He peered over the handrail. Far below the ship, between the clouds, a river wound like a green ribbon between the solemn brown hills. The air grew chilly and the atmosphere thin. Jameson's stomach growled. The return of his appetite was a good sign, he was thinking. He wondered what would be for dinner that first night away. 27. Later that evening, Commander Benjamin Binder and Dreher Freygood, the minstrel soldier, stirred and began moving about just as everyone else had finished eating and were preparing to get a good night's rest themselves. Dreher took the first night watch and was lingering portside, searching the horizons in every direction with a pair of scanners. Hard to relax, Binder said to his friend. Everything's always so damn formal around here, linguistically speaking. True, even when just randomly chatting. Like conversing subjects with kings and queens in formal meetings. Yeah, although we do have a king and a prince on board, and you are a high-ranking defense commander yourself, Binder. Since there's royalty on board this ship, is it requiring constant traditional formality, Dreher? For proper respect? No, not necessarily. Too many damn formalities. Too many formalities, not enough normalities. With some simple, casual conversation, Dreher chortled. Binder took control of Sunshaft Arielis from Master Pilot Percy so that the Mehekian could get some well-deserved rest downstairs in his personal cocoon. Dreher and Gabriel spoke quietly together in the hold, discussing their options, and Ott was below, still asleep, purring like a kitten. Jameson had made a small talk with the crew throughout the day, but conversations were short and purposeful. He found that sitting in the spinning hammock armchair suited him, and so, just at sunset, he was relaxing there when Percy came below deck and squatted nearby to reorganize his own small pack of supplies before resting. Jameson stared at the strange-looking man curiously. He wore a gray-hooded robe that was tied about the waist by a white braided cord. A crystal heat saber, his only weapon, hung from a clip on his belt. Though he looked young, his hair, like most Mehekians, was characteristically white, trimmed short and neat upon his oval-shaped head. Like all Mehekians, he wore a thin pair of dark eyeglasses, like a band across his face, protecting his deeply recessed, light-sensitive eyes. His pale white skin glistened as if covered by a crystalline rubber. "Good evening, Your Highness," Percy said, working diligently with nimble fingers. Instead of fingernails, the Mehekian had retractable claws, resembling those of an eagle's talons or a tiger's. Are you traveling well this evening? Jameson nodded. I saw you in the king's chambers the night of the secret council, he said. Yes, Percy answered. I saw you there as well. We had a busy night that night. Jameson was astounded how clear the voice seemed, since Percy had no mouth. We have no Mahekians in my palace back home in Mead, he said, that I was aware of. There are rumored in secret places out there, but all I've seen of your race are pictures. I'm intrigued that I have met you and have now seen your kind here on the mainland. Ah ha ha, Percy said. Curiosity has surfaced. Well, we are, by nature, a peaceful and reclusive people, Your Majesty, content to live quiet lives away from the rest of the world whenever possible. Mead must be a very peaceful island, then, if my brethren are that well secluded. It is, he answered, or at least it was when I left. Well, let us hope it remains so, the master pilot replied. And from the tone Jameson received, the Mahekian was internally smiling. So what have you learned of my people then, sire, if you have not had the benefit of associating with us? Much, but whether it is true or not is up to you to say. I was always curious about your people in my studies. I learned that you are a noble, elder race, origins unknown, ancient, and, as you said, solitary, kind to a fault, but can be ruthless and deadly if need arises. Humble, thoughtful, and generous by nature. Utilitarian, fierce in battle and loyal to the end. Artistic, prolific, Mahekians are the kingdom's collectors of knowledge. Librarians, Percy suggested. Yes, librarians. You flatter me, Your Highness, the Mahekian said. Your insight and observations are very astute. I am most honored by your words. Well, in brevity, I suppose. However, I'm sure that my limited knowledge does not scratch the surface of the depths of Mahekian history and lore. Jameson nodded, smiling in return. It is a comfort, though, knowing that you're on board, he said. But may I ask you a question? Please. I'm puzzled. How is it that I can hear you speaking so clearly? Can you explain it to me further? Percy looked at him. You have not been taught how Mahekians communicate? Well, that it is through a sort of mental projection instead of sound? Well, yes, in a simplified manner, that is it. Jameson's brows tightened. Then how is it that I can actually hear you? I am projecting to you. Jameson considered this. No, I can actually hear you, the same as I hear anyone when they speak to me. That is the effect, yes, Percy explained. Whether sound comes as waves to your ears or it is projected to you mentally, these thoughts, these messages are still translated in your brain the exact same way. However, a Mahekian may choose with whom he speaks at will or with whom he does not choose to speak to. He may choose his own voice or imitate another. The projection is as controllable as one's own imagination. We hear each other by feeling those projections in our own minds. Telepathic communication. And you can hear me? Oh, we can hear you telepathically as you speak. All sounds have a distinct vibration. Each voice, each sound has a different vibration that we Mayheckians, to a certain degree, can register both in our minds and with our sensitive skin. As you probably know, we breathe, hear, taste, and smell through our skin. We can gauge the temperature, detect changes in pressure and altitude, which aids in weather prediction, sense movement in the air, light density, light direction, water direction, heat, electrical fields, vibration, and more. It's very convenient and useful. As you said, utilitarian. Can you read my mind? No, Percy said, as if he had answered this same question many times before. Only audible sound. Can you change colors? To a limited degree, yes, usually from intense emotion rather than intentional camouflage. Just like you change colors emotionally. Though, if that is what you're asking, that skill seems to be passing from us through the ages because of neglected use. It must have been an important defense mechanism in the elder days. Jameson smiled and shrugged. Well, thank you for today's lesson, Master Pilot Percy. I found it enlightening. You are welcome, the Mayheckian replied, bowing his head. You are both an honorable and an admirable, inquisitive king, Jameson Day. I am not a king, he was thinking, but thoroughly enjoyed the conversation with Percy nonetheless. Percy wrapped himself in his cocoon hammock and rested. 28. The next morning, breakfast was served in the waning dark, just hours before the suns were up, with just a hint of pink and fiery orange easing from the bleak edge of the otherwise cloudless eastern sky for them all to see by. Dreher had been cooking, and a grand camp chef he was too. He had 2 seasoned, soft-boiled turkey eggs for each of them, and had warmed a roasted molten ham on a spit over the small hickory cooking pit in the small kitchen area that opened on a retractable shelf to the outside of the skycraft. The aroma of the smoking ham teased both nostrils and bellies. There was warm, bitter bread for everyone, with pats of melting butter and jars of beeswax honey set on the side. The mimosa tea was fresh and hot. Except for Percy, who always ate his meals in private. The rest of the company casually ate together on the rear deck, even though it was windy and cramped. It was the only area on the fightercraft large enough for them all to sit in one place, knee to knee. As they were finishing up, they all gathered for a brief impromptu meeting. Dreher Freygood relieved Percy from the helm so that he could excuse himself to go below to eat his breakfast privately and spend time in meditative prayer, as was the wont of his race. Dreher swung Sunshaft Aurealis angling skyward, arcing in an upward circle, and then accelerated, leveling off low in the sky, cutting hard just above the vivid treetops. The troop took a quick vote and unanimously elected Gabriel temporary leader of the expedition in Dedlin's absence, with Dreher as his advisor and first mate. Okay then, let's get officially acquainted, Gabriel said to the small group. His first order of business was to tell them his place in the story so far, beginning with his discovery of the lost Mayheckian city of Swaria Talu, which enthralled a lot of them, particularly Dreher Freygood and Master Pilot Percy, who was listening intently from just below the galley door. He described it to them and pointed out its location on a map so that if he could not, for some reason, ever return there, at least others would know of its existence and someday make the time to report and explore it, as long as he got the credit for its discovery. Then he described in detail the circumstances surrounding the discovery of young King Day in the coils of the snake, his rescue, and of the vicious leg wound that he had field treated. He told the story of their difficulties and travels and of the assassins Habad and Tirzah, who most had heard of. He told of the battle on the cliff and of their arrival in Tungulin, bringing them up to date. Jameson then took his turn as well, going back even further, describing his ordeals before meeting Gabriel in the jungles of the Galothian forest from his viewpoint and not the prince's. He described his last days in the Palace of Mead, the final meetings where all had agreed that it was time for him to depart for the mainland, and under what circumstances and advisories he was given. The journey across the White Sea by ship, the loss of his crew, and the harrowing events with Habad and Tirzah, including the miraculous escape aboard their stolen assassin's craft. The crew was fascinated with his story, hanging onto his every word. In fact, Dreher had himself a goblet of wine to cheer the adventures. It was too early yet for any of the rest of them to indulge. And so, for now, in the most simplest terms, we are heading east. On the way to where? To Gorn, Gabriel relayed to them, shrugging his shoulders. I spoke throughout the night with Dreher Fragan, and after much consideration, we believe we've come upon with what we both agree is a good initial plan of action in Dedlin's absence. Dreher, can you explain more, if you will? Dreher nodded to the crew. Well, truthfully, we are going on what I would call an optimistic potential supposition. Unfortunately, that's all we really have at this point, an optimistic potential supposition, as it were. Dedlin and I spoke often in the past few years and became very close as friends do. We spoke of things both professional and personal. Months ago, Dedlin told me about a recurring dream that he kept having, a wizard's dream that both moved and haunted him. He believed it to be relevant in some way, as of yet unknown, he said, and using his own word, prophetic. He told me that in this dream, his cranial ears had been drawn eastward, like to the calling of some desperation, or as from some ethereal voice of an energy, weak and uninterpretable, from far beyond our own borders and all the way to distant lands of Gorn. He spoke of this dream vision to me several times, but it never occurred to me until this recent disappearance in our own current plight that that vision could be in some way relevant. I realize that it's not much, but knowing the precognitive visions of wizards, I believe it's the best we have. Binder scoffed quietly. Dreams, he mumbled. Jameson, however, felt a very slight relief hearing this news. At least it was something, a direction. He chose to believe in support. To Gorn, to do what exactly? Commander Binder inquired. Firstly, to safely elude all eyes. Dreher answered, meeting eyes with Commander Ben, and to keep the king safe. For the time being, we'll leave it at that. And more secrets. Wonderful. Nothing like not being in the loop. Gabriel spun his head about, seeing if there would be anything else except breakfast. Keep an eye out, he said, and rose to relieve himself down in the privy of the Skycraft hold. Near midday, they paused briefly at a rugged cliffside outpost for more food and supplies. Near the way road, they briefly spoke to a group of young men passing by who had already heard about the previous day's occurrences at Tungulin, inspiring them to volunteer and take up arms to join the fight there as soon as was possible. We want to join the crew of a Tungulin warship. We heard that several brigades have left for battle already, said one eager lad, no more than 18 years old. We heard that several Tungulin warships have departed to the west and southwest to bring the battle to the rabble Gharnian infidels there. We want to do our part. Pretending that they knew nothing themselves, the Sunshaft crew fearfully wished the eager young patriots much luck and honor before departing. If this was the harbinger of what was to come, it was surely premature and disheartening, yet eventually inevitable. They spent the day on board organizing their meager belongings and assigning basic chores such as cleaning, piloting the ship, and night watch, all shifts done equally on rotating basis. It was important for them to keep busy with some semblance of order and discipline, to keep them from thinking too much about things and getting antsy or frustrated, basically, not knowing a thing. In the meantime, keeping to plan, they flew in a direct line toward the southeast, toward distant Gorn. After dinner, as most crowded into the cabin to split a bottle or two of Dreher's potent wine to lighten the spirits, the conversation turned to the events of 2 nights before, when Devlin, Dreher, and Binder had gone off to investigate the Median Skycraft Tigra in the forests, amongst the marauding Gogmors of Bondoon. Everyone was most interested to hear what had happened, King Day explicitly, and Dreher and Binder were happy and eager to oblige their telling of the tale. First and foremost, before even getting started, Binder defensively reiterated beforehand that not only had he made his point to King Bantu that night that Devlin should not have gone along in the first place because of age, and that he had again reiterated to all, to both Devlin and Dreher themselves while aboard Stardeer, that in the most adamant of terms, the whole investigating the wreck in the forest at night and on foot was an extremely bad idea, in his opinion. Then and still was today. And Dreher concurred. Yes, he was quite clear on that. Now, in retrospect, it appears that the commander's stodgy, overbearing advice may have been wise. Stodgy? Now, can we get on with it? Dreher said, and he presented the story to them, all in full detail. Dreher was a natural, masterful storyteller. It was a craft he had perfected over many years, traveling the kingdom as a wayward minstrel and courtyard storyteller. And so then, everyone hung onto each and every word as if it were a theatrical performance. When he came to the part where the 3 were racing up the hill to escape the cattle wolves, Binder took over. Suddenly, we heard a lot of missile fire above our heads, which momentarily disoriented us. We then realized that the Gharnians had returned, and that they were destroying the Gogmor fighters as they rose up from investigating the Tigra. Their burning ships crashed down through the trees, falling to the ground all around us. We were perplexed at first, but then we understood. The Gharnians wanted to ensure that they had destroyed anything and everything that the Gogmore soldiers might have found there. And every one, Dreher added. They could not risk any messages from Meade reaching Tungulin or any potential evidence from the wreck reaching Gharwan in Bandoon. They had to be sure that nothing from the Tigra was left intact, so they destroyed every last Gogmore. Then blamed the attack on Tungulin. Why shouldn't Gharwan the Great believe them? The Gharnians have been supplying Bandoon with weapons and ammunition and supplies for years for the simple request of just dedication and commitment and loyalty, while Tungulin only offers them local trade sanctions and constant territorial legal skirmishes. They've made an alliance, Garn and Bandoon, and Gharwan wrongly trusts them. Once the Gogmores were cleared from the sky, the Gharnians dropped a firebomb on the Tigra, destroying it beyond any hope of recognition. Ruthless, efficient, and thorough. And by all accounts, they succeeded, Binder droned. We'll never know who or what was aboard the Tigra now. Jameson was disheartened again. I'm sure that Devlin had found something before we left, Dreher said. He was clenching some maps and documents that he had managed to seize from the flames in the lower hold of the ship. His very cape was on fire from the feet. I'm sure he could have, and eventually will, shed some light on this mystery. I, for one, will not believe that Devlin Dane ended up in a wolverine's belly, Gabriel said. Nor I, said Dreher. I know him too well. He's far too wily for that, and stubborn, and strong. How did you two escape the wolverines if Devlin did not and the ship had disappeared? Jameson asked him with a scowl. Well, we unfortunately found Stardeer just moments before the wolverines reached us, Binder said. Dreher climbed up first and I followed. A wolverine tried for a bite of me, but got a heel in his mouth instead. I'm sure he lost a few teeth. Then the beast gnawed off the bottom rungs of the ladder before we could get away from them. One held on for nearly an hour, growling and twisting in the air, as we waited nearby for Devlin's return. Hateful beast. We searched for the wizard for the rest of the night, while at the same time eluding the Gharnian searchlights hidden in the trees, Dreher said. We never found a trace of him. With that solemn thought, the conversation ended. Dinner dishes were done and evening's chores were finished. That night seemed particularly sad and lonely. A bit of rain passed after midnight, but not much more than a sprinkling. 29. There was not much to do on the following day, or the next. The crew took turns at the helm, always steering in a southeasterly course. They began discussing possible options once they reached Tus, and they thought about trying other wizards in that territory, possibly in Oleander or bustling Irisia, or on the possible location of secretive caves in various areas, to investigators, perhaps naturalists, instead of who they really were. They agreed to attempt to reach King Bantu by message sphere the first chance they got, to let them know that they were fine and to see how their city was faring since their departure. And most importantly, to see if there were any word on the wise and worldly wizard that they had lost in the woods. Jameson noted that being exposed to the elements aboard the skycraft traveling at a good speed didn't seem to affect anyone else on board. Neither wind, nor rain, nor temperature seemed to matter. They were all comfortable being exposed in the skies of the wild while on deck. But he wasn't. Ott remained acceptably cordial enough when addressed, yet rather unsociable and distant at all other times. He did not mingle with the rest of the crew, and always eyed them with some degree of disdain and scrutiny when he was not staring pensively off the back of the ship in the distant horizon. Concern about his demeanor was often a quiet topic of shallow conversation between some of the others. Jameson, however, generally defended the Thorian. He seemed to feel oddly comfortable around him, the same as he would a lifelong bodyguard. And in fact, in some strange way, he felt as if he had seen Ott somewhere before all of this, although that could not have been logically possible. 2 more days didn't pass without any dramatic change, even the weather, which remained mild. The trees in the forest below them were mostly the broadleaf deciduous variety. The streams were green and heavy from recent rains. The few fields crisscrossed with animal trails that were speckled with yellow buttercup flowers. There were rising buttes of stout rock along the eastern horizon, sheer walls of smoky granite, similar to the Galoth rock plateau, yet far smaller in stature and girth, diminishing off into the northeast and southeast mists like tombstones in a graveyard fog. Jameson did his very best to not look down to anyone. He worried what the others might be thinking about what they were doing out there and where they were going to do it, because they were on their way somewhere. But where? No one had any idea. Just there. He felt as if he could point in every single direction. As time passed, the trees below began to thin, and in some places they cleared altogether, revealing wide expanses of knotty hills covered with the luscious emerald green grasses Jameson could ever remember seeing. Percy took Sunshaft Aurealis down toward the earth, closer to the fragrant meadows, guiding the craft masterfully between the sparse, thick-bodied oaks that grew in random clusters in the folds of lumpy and bumpy hills. Gabriel spoke a few authoritative words to Percy, and the Mahekian nodded in agreement. Sunshaft began slowing as Percy drew back on the acceleration bar. The skycraft glided to a smooth stop just off the crest of a grassy knob, hovering about 3 feet from the surface of the ground. A sparkling stream gurgled down near the base of the odd, knotted hill, forced to twist and drop over the irregular stones in a series of tiny falls and clear pools, dotted with tadpoles and minnows. "Why are we stopping?" Binder asked, coming up from the lower deck. "Water," Gabriel answered. They had traveled nonstop for several days. "Just surplus water. We're nearly out." Freygood looked around the area suspiciously, as if something there was making him feel uncomfortable out there, though he could not quite place it. He hopped over the side into the tall grasses first, before anyone else, which rose up over his knees, and he then surveyed the area all around them. From the port side of the Sunshaft Aurealis, he opened a panel and began unrolling a vacuum siphon hose used for, wild water refills. rolling it over his arm and shoulder in loops, keeping it a ready eye on the surroundings. Percy clambered over the side to assist him. "You want to get out and stretch your legs a bit?" Gabriel asked Jameson. "Maybe a long time before we stop again, your highnessness." Across the hillside on the opposite side of the creek, Jameson could see remnants of an old crooked road, lined with weather-worn stone markers that ran somewhat east to west. It was all but covered with the lush grasses and thick peat, probably unused for years. He looked at the windswept reeds swaying all about beneath the sunshaft aureolus. "No," he answered. There was something unwholesome about the knotted hills there that he did not like, even if they harbored snakes and spiders. "I'll wait here. I'll see you shortly then." Gabriel, Percy, and Dreher headed on down the hill to the stream, pulling the siphon hose along with them. Binder, however, stood near the vacuum motor and awaited their signal to switch it on. Pythagoras was lying prone on the back bench, watching the dark trees behind them while grooming himself, licking the fur on his forearms with his rough sandpaper tongue, and combing his long white whiskers with his clawed, paw-like hands. Jameson looked closely at the Thordian, studying his striking face. Soft, cream-colored fur, surrounded by golden brown, with a distinguishable white stripe up the middle of his face. The fur of his entire mane was wreathed with black tips. He had fierce, amber-yellow eyes and a large white canines that showed only when he spoke. All in all, a magnificent beast. His face seemed particularly tense since they had stopped, though. His ears occasionally pricked up, as if he sensed something beyond the trees, out in the multi-layered brush beyond the hill that they squatted on. Yet, look as he might, Jameson did not see or hear anything out there, but he was curious just the same. He drew in closer to Ott, joining the Thordian near the aft of the ship. The Thordian bowed his head respectfully as the young king drew in closer. "You keep staring off the stern of this ship as though there's something back there that you see following us. I assure you we took all precautions." "You can never be too cautious, Your Highness." "I'm wondering, Pythagoras," Jameson then said. "You look strangely familiar to me. Have we met somewhere before? Is that even possible?" he asked. He leaned over the rail, looking into the same dark trees that Ott had been gawking at. "My homeland has many Thordians, so I could be mistaken." Ott shifted in his seat, adjusting the strap which pinned his aerojet rifle to his back. "No, we have never met Your Highness," he answered with the odd accent Thordians had when pronouncing human words. "Still, I have always served the good kingdom of Day, as I will continue to do to the best of my abilities." Jameson continued to study him curiously. "You choose to remain distant from the rest of the crew. Why is that? You might have noticed the others grow suspicious of you." Ott spoke slowly, choosing his words with precision, as he always seemed to do. "I have found that sometimes it's good to be suspicious of one another sometimes." His long lashes batted at a gray moth that fluttered near his face. "Even friends and companions, especially during these days. I am cautious, that is all. I am a stranger to this land, It takes time and experience for a Thorian to grant trust and friendship to strangers. I beg your patience, Your Highness. Gabriel called from the hollow. The hose was in place in the stream and ready to suck. Binder kicked on the vacuum motor, and within minutes the craft began taking on crystal clean stream water. In her two lower holding tanks through a series of filters for debris and anything else of nature unwanted in their tank. Binder checked to make sure the filters were properly activated and functioning correctly. I understand that, Jameson then said, after thinking a bit. I do. I've had to do the same thing myself. I traveled with Gabriel for many days before I even spoke a word to him. Ott smiled. Jameson saw a mouthful of sharp canines. But soon it will be time for you to tell your own story as well, Sir Althagorus. We're all curious about you and why King Vantu placed you in this fellowship. My story will be told very soon, Your Highness. That I do promise. No need to call me Your Highness. Binder then came up from the lower deck and saw them speaking together. Well, since you seem to have nothing to do, once again, Sir Mr. Ott, he said without restraint, would you care to take a break from sunning and getting out to stretch your legs for a bit? All four of them? Perhaps lapping a drink of water from the stream, have a bath? He asked. We could set you up a hammock in the shade, or you could just stay here and relax and groom yourself with everyone else does the work, as usual. Forgive Binder and his sarcasm, Jameson said, frowning at the commander. He's still cross for having to leave Tungulin, and he has the manners of a bear. Besides, he should learn to be more civil, especially when the one he is addressing is already active in conversation with someone else. My apologies, Binder said, nodding to King Day. I mean no respect, Your Majesty. It's just frustrating to watch this one recline back here on his furry backside, watching every sunrise and sunset day after day, doing little more than a scowl at the rest of us doing all the work. I mean, none of us here knew him. We don't know where he's from or why he's even here, so I just don't trust him. Binder, Jameson scolded. I've never liked Thorians, he went on, and with good reason, and this one is giving me no reason to start. I do not serve you, Ott told Binder blandly with a side glance. Therefore, I do not need to answer to you. Before Binder could reply, Jameson stepped in, speaking sharply. It would serve you both well to attempt to get along together while aboard this ship. It is far too small for you to try to choose corners to hide from one another. We may be together for a while, and you may very well end up depending upon one another for your very lives soon. So, if you have an issue, either of you, I insist you work it out diplomatically, as gentlemen warriors. This crew must work together as a team while we travel together. We are all on the same side here. I'm not so sure of that, the commander said, and then physically digressed somewhat ashamedly. Well, I, for one, shall try, Ott growled, eyes still on the angry commander. Binder, so what do you suggest then? Should our guest, who King Vantu himself requests to join us, be ejected from our ship and be off on his own out here? No, of course not. I also apologize, Binder said. I'm perplexed about things. I have a lot on my mind. We all do, Commander, Jameson said. But what say? We trust King Van Tu for now, huh? I suspect that our new friend here has purposes we have yet to discover. If he chooses to save his words and strength for the time being, it could be for a good reason. I, for one, understand the importance of keeping secrets. Your Highness, the Lion Man abruptly said, one finger of his paw with extended claw raising upward as if something out there in the trees had garnered his guardian attention. He slowly rose, eyes squinting toward the trees beyond the rise of the hill behind them, neck craned and fur bristling on his broad neck. Both Jameson and Commander Binder followed his feline gaze. And at this opportune moment, in my own defense, I would like to point out that I have not been as idle as I've been accused of being, nor have I been able to enjoy a single sunset since the morning we left. This is probably a good time to inform you both that we are being followed, as I have suspected and have been for days, although no one else has seemed to notice it somehow or care. Jameson looked back toward the braided trees from where Ott had been staring earlier. Followed. What do you mean? By whom? By them. The Thordian answered, discreetly directing his glance to a spot low within the trees. You can see them plainly now. Look closely. Right there. Where the bit of sky is showing through the opening above that clump of thickets. They're being careless. You can see them clearly now. Binder joined them at the rail. I don't see anything, Jameson said, squinting. Just below the middle terraces, about 30 feet back into the trees, Ott replied. A ship, camouflaged in colors. I see them, Binder hissed. Scouts, probably Gharnian. Damn, they followed us. I don't know how, but they've followed us. Don't be too conspicuous. They're using a small shadow craft, Binder said. It's a cloaked scout ship used for spying. Maybe holding 3 soldiers. Wait, there's another craft. A one-man sky sled gliding alongside the first. I thought I briefly spotted the smaller craft 3 nights ago, Ott told them. The larger one appeared only earlier this morning. You should have told us the moment you saw them, Binder snapped. I was the only one not assigned on watch for some reason, Ott replied casually, but I have anyway, since it is obvious that I have the best eye for this. I didn't report it right away because I had to be sure. Also, I wanted to test the abilities, and perhaps the loyalty of this crew. Loyalty of this crew? Binder snapped again. There are Gharnian spies of the highest offices kingdom-wide, Ott coldly replied. How can I be sure there are none aboard this ship? You are all as strange to me as I am to you. Binder frowned at Ott. You're a fool. The Thordian continued. There were many Gharnian scout ships tailing the other decoy skycrafts when we first left Tungula, and I saw them. These 2 are the only ones I've seen since then. They're following only us. They're clever and careful until now, and are armed adequately enough, but they know that we outgun them. So, they wait and reporting. They are merely scouts. Information gatherers. They are monitoring Tungulan traffic, learning trade routes, potential escape routes, and defense strategies. Or they could be looking specifically for us, Jameson added. They're certainly taking every precaution, Binder said with a sneer, and they more than likely know that we know about them now, too. If they've seen us, they've seen you, Your Majesty, and there could be some suspicion at the very least. Hopefully, they still believe you're not you, and that the real King Day is lounging in Tungulan, taking refuge, because if not, as soon as they know that you are here, every Gharnian ship in Galgaria will be after us, if what we believe to be true might indeed be true. We need to inform the others, Jameson said. We need to get out of here. Can we outrun them? We could sabotage them, Binder said, heading for the helm. He didn't want to raise alarm by shouting to Gabriel and the others. Chances are we could destroy them both right here before they make any contact with their superiors. We're not at war yet, Jameson pointed out, intending not start a fight if necessary. Gharnians have an excellent communication system, Ott advised, still remaining as calm as he had been before. We would have to be swift, perhaps split up and ambush them from behind as well, just to sabotage their ships. Binders shifted their control out of idle, and the sun shaft Aurealis began to slide down the rim of the hill toward the stream as smoothly as melting butter off of a hot biscuit. Suddenly, the skycraft jerked and stopped, spinning a bit, but she would not bulge further another inch. What's wrong? Jameson asked, looking around. Are we snagged on a stump or something? Binder raised the throttle, but Sunshaft Aurealis would not respond to it. In fact, the craft began surging back up the hill in the opposite direction, as if being gently pulled by a silent crank or magnet. Impossible, he barked. The bottom of this craft is smooth. There's nothing extending below to get snagged on anything. I saw no log to get stuck on when we parked. Ott and Jameson peered over the rail on opposite sides of the ship. I didn't like the look of this place as soon as I saw it, Jameson replied. It looked like snakes to me. Sunshaft veered slightly to the right and to the left, as if something from below was firmly tugging at it. Binder, looking over his shoulder at the spies in the dark trees, increased the throttle. We're certainly either attached to something or we're having a major skycraft malfunction, he said. The whirring turbines began to rattle as the frequency rose, the exhaust pipes emitting a fine black smoke that began to cover the grass behind them with a dusty pale ash. Either way, not good. Not so hard. Whatever has us, if it lets loose, we're going to shoot into the clouds as if from a cannon, Jameson said, holding tightly to the vibrating rail. Ott suggested and volunteered to have a look below them. He opened the starboard gate and hung his hairy head over the side, and he glanced from the right to the left. Suddenly, he scrambled back, falling to the deck, rolling frantically backwards. From the open gate, a long green tentacle rose up, wrapping tightly around the perimeter rail where Ott had just lay prone, and it pulled down hard enough to bend the unbendable plasteel bar. What is that? Jameson cried. Binder seized a fire axe from the cabin wall. It's a creeper, he said, as if this were the worst luck of all. The biggest one I've ever seen. He raised a heavy axe above his head and brought it down hard on the smooth tentacle. The thick rail bent from the blow. The wood beneath splintered, but the rubbery skin of the creeper did not sever. It was pinched enough, though, that it released its hold and disappeared back over the side. "It's gone," Ott exclaimed. "No, it's not," Binder replied. "They're relentless." Two more tentacles rose up, gripping the rail on the port side. "There's more of them," Jameson cried. "But it's one creature," Binder growled, pounding on the splotchy green and brown arms like a crazed machine, but with little or no effect. Two more tentacles had seized the rails. 111 arms, he said to them between strikes. "Sometimes more." Ott unwrapped one of the tentacles by hand and retreated. Then it rose a few feet away to tighten around the rail again. "It feels no pain," he rumbled ferociously. "Pain? It's a rubber plant," Binder answered, grabbing a wood saw from the nearby tool chest. "A carnivorous rubber plant. It lives in muddy holes under the ground, preying on whatever passes by. If we can't free this ship in the next few seconds, this insipid creeper is going to pull it down into the ground and attempt to eat it." Gabriel, still hobbling on his bad leg, then came up over the hill with the others just then, winding up the siphon hose around his shoulder and arm. When he saw what was happening on the hilltop, he dropped the hose and quickly unsheathed his blaster. He fired a few rounds, but the huge creeper went unfazed by the blast, popping explosive holes in it. Two stumps waved ineffectively in the air, leaking oozy green sap. "Get out," he called to them. "We've lost it." "We can't lose the ship," Jameson cried. "We can't beat this thing," Gabriel reiterated as he drew in closer. "I've seen these things devour golems. It's already damaged the ship beyond repair. It's already into the open water tanks." "We can't lose the ship," Binder then repeated, sawing hardly at a rubbery tentacle that had seized a mooring hook with the bow at the bow with a cut used for tree trunks. "Look," he said, pointing into the trees behind him. "We've been discovered." Dreher Freygood and Master Pilot Percy had reached Gabriel's side, and they all spotted the Gharnian scout ships at the same time. The three of them circled Suncraft Aurealis, firing again and again at the creeper with their blasters in a futile attempt to save it. Many arms were severed, hewn, and cut. Many more arms replaced them without effort, faster than they could be destroyed. They slid up and out from muddy holes everywhere, securing themselves to Percy's floundering skycraft with hungry determination, pulling it steadily downward toward the turbulent mounds of churning earth. Binder had left the craft revving at full throttle. It bolted upward again, stretching the rubbery coils that secured it. The earth below seemed to raise up from the force, but the ancient creeper held on tight. Ott had been throwing as much of their food and equipment overboard as he was able. Percy and Dreher hurried to retrieve it before the creeper could. "Jump!" Gabriel called to them, "and be careful where you land." Jameson did not hesitate for a second. He leaped hard from the failing craft and rolled into the grasses as yet another tentacle rose up beside him. Percy came to his aid and pulled him to safety. Ott sprang nimbly from the sinking ship, landing squarely on all fours, and then he leaped away in two mighty bounds. Binder, however, was still on board, tossing guns and packs as much as he could over the side. "Forget about the guns, Commander," Gabriel called to him. "We've got all that we can carry as it is. Save yourself." Binder nearly fell from the tilting deck, just as a groping feeler brushed past his leg. It seized a loose blaster and pulled it over the side and down into a muddy hole. Beneath the ground, they could hear a rapid succession of shots before the gun fell silent. Binder leaped off and rolled away toward the others. The once beautiful Sunshaft Aurealis began giving way, splitting and folding in half down the middle. The mighty creature pulled the skycraft's rattling air exhaust into the soft ground. The turbines, unable to take the pressure, ruptured at the seams, sending up a smoke of black and white smoke and ash. Having no thrust left, Sunshaft Aurealis finally yielded to the creeper, like a great beast of prey, to a conquering predator. It began sinking into the earth like a dying ship at sea. "Well, the brainless thing thinks it has a huge meal," Dre replied with a sarcastic smile. "Once it sinks its teeth into it, it's going to get a big damn surprise. By tomorrow, it'll reject the ship, and up will come a crushed chunk of useless wood and plasteel to the surface," Binder said, "like countless other graveyards of creeper debris, both metal and bones." The crew gathered their belongings and sorted through them, minimizing their packs to carry now. Percy watched his ship sink lower and lower into the earth, enwrapped with seemingly countless green tendrils. He was saddened by the loss of his ship, but true to his nature, he commented that they were just fortunate not to have lost a member of the crew to the thing. "Farewell, my Sunshaft Aurealis," he concluded thoughtfully. "What now?" Ott asked. "Does anyone know where we are or where we can find another ship?" "I know a place," Dreher said. "Small town, but it's quite a walk. I think it's due east of here still, so that serves our purpose well enough. I'm just not sure if there will be any skycraft there large enough to bear the lot of us. We'll soon find out." "Where is that?" Gabriel inquired. "Long Gray Bluffs?" Dreher nodded affirmatively. Gabriel sighed. He had no better idea to offer. "We're a long way from anywhere," he commented. "On the way once more," Commander Binder added, "but where? No one knows. Always just somewhere else than where we are now." Ironically, out of all of them, Jameson seemed to be in the best of spirits. "Firstly, I suggest we get off these bumpy, lumpy, knobby, snaky hills and onto that little road right over there," he said, pointing. "It runs due east, as best I can tell." "Well, at least we'll have an anxious escort," Dreher said, referring to the Gharnian scouts, still hidden back among the dark foliage. "Even if we could take both of their crafts from them by force, we couldn't all fit aboard them. Too small." "We should still destroy them," Ott replied. "No good can come from that now. We're sitting ducks out here." Binder picked up 2 heavy packs and several guns. "I knew things would get bad, but not like this, and not this soon. What are we now? 5 days out? 6? Jameson waved at a small gray moth that fluttered playfully about his face. "Come on then, gentlemen," he said in a positive expression. "Things could be much worse than it is." The end of chapter 6. The chapter starting tomorrow is chapter 7, Arrow Green.